All right, so I am so excited to be joined by Francesca Meffert. She is a registered dietitian student on her way to being a registered dietitian. And thank you so much for joining me, Francesca.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, and we connected almost about a year ago, and it's been awesome just to kind of see how each of our paths have kind of led to each other and then onward. So I'm excited to have this conversation with you. So I just wanted to start out, could you just share your story? Because you shared this with me a little while ago, and I found it just so inspiring. If you don't mind just sharing with everyone else.
Sure. It's always that question, where do I start with the story?
Yeah.
I guess I would start with from younger age, maybe high school, I would say, I started developing certain disordered eating habits, which, I mean, to some level, I knew that I was struggling with that. But at the time, binge eating disorder still, I don't think it was a thing. So I remember looking it up at the time, and I didn't qualify as bulimia or anorexia or any of those things. And I was like, but clearly something seems to be wrong, but it just kind of kept happening. And I didn't get help because I thought at the time, I remember thinking, well, I don't have I don't have bulimia. I'm not anorexic. So therefore I don't have an eating disorder. And therefore something's just wrong with me. I remember what my line of thinking was at the time. And then, it just kept happening for years, and it led through college. And then maybe a more defining moment was specifically for this podcast. I would say that until ever speaking with you, I never made the link before, but in May 2014, I believe it was, I was playing Ultimate Frisbee and I injured my back. And ever since then, it has never been the same. And it was through speaking with you that I even made the connection that chronic back pain and eating disorders go hand in hand. At the time, I still was struggling with eating, but hadn't spoken to a professional. It was something that was very much something under wraps, sort of similar to when people have anxiety or maybe depression, they suffer with it and don't seek professional help. For me, it's because I didn't even, it never occurred to me that it was something I could even go to a professional for, because I thought it was just something intrinsically wrong with me.
Right.
And so my journey through college involved what I think would now be labeled as binge eating disorder. I was never officially diagnosed, but I looked it up back 2 years ago when I started working with professional help, and I met all the criteria for a binge eating disorder, and I also occasionally purged. And so therefore, I think I was definitely somewhere on the eating disorder realm, because disordered eating and eating disorders are slightly different. There's this full spectrum. And I think maybe something I would like to say now is wherever you sit on the spectrum, you deserve to get help. And I think I just did not realize or know that in the past. And so for I think what constituted upward of 10 to 12 years of my life, I was struggling with a combination of binge eating disorder, slightly bulimic, so I would purge occasionally, disordered eating, the whole lot for many years. And then it wasn't until 2020 when I started working with the dietitian, tracking macros specifically to lose weight, because part of why I developed all of that was always trying to lose weight and not being able to. Because I also was diagnosed with polycystic ovary syndrome in 2017. And so for anyone unaware of what PCOS is, it's sort of similar almost to diabetes in different ways, where you have to manage your blood glucose. But all of this I'm trying to say is I worked with a dietitian tracking macros, and she was like, you have pretty much binge eating issues. And she referred me to a dietitian to work on what's called intuitive eating, which is essentially eating how quote unquote normal people eat. Eating when you're hungry, kind of stopping when you're full, but also enjoying treats. There's a lot of different parameters of intuitive eating. And so I don't want to try and explain all of it now, but through working with those dietitians and then with a therapist and then group coaching and a lot of different resources, I eventually overcame that. And I'm in so much a better place now. And through working with those professionals, it reignited my own passion, in food and nutrition, which I also had from a young age. And that is what changed my mind in terms of my career to pivot and become a registered dietitian and help others in a similar capacity. And so that is my very long journey in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I love how you spoke on how you weren't even sure it was a problem in the beginning. You just thought it was something wrong with you. And I think that's such a common thing that a lot of people realize, but when you're going through that, you really think you're alone in that. And that's something I experienced too. Like I didn't realize I had a problem. I'm just like, I'm an athlete. I'm just, exercising because this is what I do. And I'm eating excessively because this is what I do. And I didn't think of that I had an eating disorder for the longest time. And I like how you pointed that out, because I think a lot of people can really resonate with that, because it is kind of great lines. And especially back then, I feel like things weren't as clear, and there weren't as many resources to realize what.
Oh, definitely. It's becoming more prevalent.
Yeah.
That's something that what I've noticed is more recently, like depression and anxiety is becoming a lot more understood and like spoken about, and like not taboo and like under the table. And second to that, or maybe third to that, like depression and anxiety would be eating disorders, in my opinion, that people are finally starting to speak out and realize they're things, especially because, like I said, it's a spectrum, and you might not have an eating disorder, but maybe you have disordered eating. And like I said, all of it is valid to get help, because it's something that is a problem and pain point in your life that it's so much better when you don't have that. So.
Oh, definitely. Yes. And it is, everyone, like you said, everyone is deserving of help, whether you have a clinical diagnosis or you're just struggling with figuring out how to have a balance of what you're doing with food, or maybe exercise, or whatever you're doing. You need to have those resources available, because to be tethered down by that, like you can state that, and myself too, to be tethered down to like counting calories or excessively eating, or just any kind of unhealthy relationship with food, it's really, really challenging to live your life in a fulfilling manner when you're doing that.
Completely.
Yeah. What would you say, like when you were going through that and had kind of in the thick of that, what would you say your mindset was then versus what your mindset is now?
Oh, definitely. I would say all or nothing mentality, for sure. It's something that I didn't even realize that I had. So for instance, let me transport myself back of like several years into like before I really knew about binge eating or disordered eating or anything that I know now. I was constantly always trying to lose weight and struggling with that. And so my mindset would very much be I would end up binging, and then I would think to myself, or I would start to eat something, and then it would lead to what was a binge. And then I would think, I'll just be better tomorrow. And what I realize now, and so even when I started working with the dietitian with intuitive eating, she mentioned something to me. So when you label foods as good and bad, or even when you label them as healthy and unhealthy, that's labeling it in black and white thinking. And nutrition and health and all of lifestyle encompasses on a spectrum and gray area. And so when, especially like looking specifically at food, there's like a nutritional profile, and you can't just label something healthy or unhealthy. And so now I operate much more in that gray area, and realizing that it's not as black and white as I used to think, which definitely kept me in those binge cycles and made it a lot worse. So that's definitely a shift that had to take place. I would certainly think of like many different shifts, but that would maybe be almost like a catch-all, because I had to learn to work within, like, you can't just be so strict with things. Similar to, I think, what you were saying, because you were a college level athlete, which entails a lot upon you, which is probably part of why you didn't realize you might have had struggles, because it was like, this is what I got to do. This is what and I think I remember hearing from someone that people who struggle with like eating, it was on a podcast, and that's one of the resources I can mention. It was on another podcast called It's Not About the Food by Stephanie Reynolds. She's a board certified psychiatrist, but she mentioned people who struggle with like disordered eating and eating disorders. By nature, we are like the type A personality that want to be perfect. And so it's very difficult for us to like kind of wind back and think, I don't have to be perfect with this, and being okay. Because when on those days where I would maybe overeat and be like, am I allowed to curse on here? Like, okay, fuck it, I'm just gonna eat whatever the hell I want,
That's right.
Then that would lead to a binge, and I would feel awful, like all the different things. And that mindset of it's either all or nothing, black and white, kept me so far removed from like having a kind of balanced level of happiness that I feel I understand so much more now.
Yeah, isn't it amazing when you look back at where you were mentally and then where you are now? It's like it almost feels like you're a different person in that way.
Completely. Oh yeah. I think I actually mentioned it feels like you're shedding a skin.
Yeah.
I remember when I sort of came out, as I like to call it, as like I had struggled because like especially even with people who have depression or anxiety, I think it's very difficult taking that step to tell people initially about it. But when I remember like coming out publicly about it, like I remember I went live on Facebook, which I dare not even look at now because I know it would be like super cringy to me now, but I remember at the time I was thinking my sole purpose was to let other people know, not necessarily to help myself, but I realized that that came secondary. First of all, I wanted to like let people know because like I mentioned, I think that first and second depression and anxiety is being talked about more, but not people with eating. I don't hear any of my friends speaking up saying I had an eating disorder. I've heard lots of people who I know say that they have depression or anxiety, but not eating disorders. And so I wanted to be one of the first people among like at least my platform of communicate like network communication on Facebook to say like I just want people to know I've struggled with this, and if you've ever struggled with something like this too, it is okay and there is hope for you. And I thought that was really important. And the secondary thing that came from that was I realized, wow, I feel like a snake molting my skin. That sounds kind of creepy, but it's such a good example. It's coming forth and saying I no longer identify with what was holding me down.
Yeah, there's so many therapeutic parts of that. And it is so, brave to come out and say like, this is what I struggle with. And this is where I am now, because when we were going through it and mine was several years ago. And I think yours was, how many years was yours ago? About
I got help in 2020, so about like 2 years. So and I think I was like more still recovering in 2021. Like I would say like this year I've definitely been like more recovered, but so fairly more recent than you.
Yep. And I think like the big thing is that it's just the more that it's out there and it's like, a lot of people struggle with this. You're not alone, because I think especially with the eating disorder, it's so secretive that you feel like you're very much alone in it. And that's how I felt too. Like I felt like nobody knew about it. And only when I disclosed it to one friend back then, I felt like, oh my gosh, somebody knows. Okay, at least I have somebody on my side. But it's like when you open up kind of to the world online, it's like, okay, here it is. And like, it's like when you bring awareness to things, it can't grow anymore. Like you take control of it. And that's really the big thing, is like bringing awareness, bringing light to that situation that was really dark. And now all of a sudden you become the person in control of it rather than the eating disorder controlling you. And it is so amazing to see that like therapeutic journey when you're open about, this is me, this is the real me, take it or leave it. And it's not only helps other people, but also helps yourself when you're so open to tell your story so candidly.
Oh, exactly. Part of what really helped me in recovery was I'm plugging like so many different resources, like while I think about this, but
that's great.
Another podcast was the Dear Body podcast by Jessie Jean. And I actually haven't listened to it in a while because a lot of those resources I no longer listen to because I feel like more recovered, but like during my journey, they were super helpful. And hers, she would sort of I was about to say interview, but I feel like interview is maybe like a weird word to use, but she would have other people, like every other episode would be a her story podcast, which was literally asking, like having similar to what I'm doing now, talking about my journey and how I got through it, and listening to so many other people and their stories and their journeys just made me feel so like safe and validated, that and also kind of like appreciate that everyone's journey is their own, but listening to so many other people struggling helped me so much. Because you realize you're not alone, even if you're not directly communicating with those people. Just listening to other people and their stories can be so profound sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. And it really becomes like a community when you have all these people who are like, oh my gosh, because I think unless you really have struggled with disorder eating or an eating disorder, you don't really understand or grasp the complete mindset that you're in when you're going through that, unless you've been through it. So when you all of a sudden realize like, oh my gosh, there's a whole community of people that have been going through the same exact thing, it makes you feel just like, okay, it's not just me. Like you can almost take a breath of fresh air. Okay, other people have gotten through this. I can do this as well. And it just gives you that strength, that inner strength to realize that this is not forever. This is a stage in my life, and this will become my greatest strength at one point once I get past these struggles. And it's an amazing thing when you can see that.
Yes, definitely. As you were saying that, I was kind of like smiling and laughing to myself, because when you mentioned the community aspect, it reminded me, I think maybe in my second episode I forgot, of my own podcast, where I said when I first started to realize how many more people in that community, I remember feeling like when Tarzan meets other humans for the first time, and he's like, honestly, his mind is blown. I'm like, there are so many other people that struggle. And remember, compared to when we felt so alone and so isolated, and like it was our own problem. And then when you see that there's so many other people like you realize you can overcome, and it's so motivational. There's so much power in community. So I just want to mention that too, because I found it funny.
Yeah, no, that's so funny. It is really true. You're like, oh my gosh, it's like you really feel like you've just been like hidden under a rock, and you're like, oh my gosh, I thought I was alone for all these years. And here, like, there's people right next to you. And again, it's like when people aren't open to speak about that, which, you know, when you're in the thick of it, you typically aren't, because there's just a lot going on in your mind at that point, but you just don't realize like what people are going through all around you. And I can think one of those things, like when you walk on campus or you walk, you know, down the street or wherever you are, you never know what people are struggling with. And that's one of those things. It's like, you think you're the only one who has struggles. Everyone has struggles, but we're not aware of that when we're walking past somebody. And it's just important to know that you're never alone. There's other people going through this as well.
Yes, I completely agree.
With an eating disorder, so there's usually some contributing factors. It's not just about food, obviously, with an eating disorder. Do you know what contributed to some of that mindset that brought you down to that path of disorder?
That's why I love that one podcast I mentioned. It's not about the food, because it's not about the food.
It's not about the food. That's just
the food. I love the title of that, because there's so many, because I think something that people don't realize is that it's a mental thing that you're working through. It is usually, well, particularly for eating disorders, it's like a mental illness. I mean, disordered eating could, like, you know, fall in different areas, but going to that mental aspect, for me, there were tons of different things. I think one of the largest contributors was the fact that, as I mentioned kind of earlier on, I was diagnosed with PCOS when I was 21, I think, when I was finally diagnosed. Now, for people that don't know much about it, the symptoms of PCOS include like horrific acne. I had acne, like not just like on my face, but like on my back, my inner thighs, which was awful. My legs before, like weird places that you would not expect. Like, I'm sorry if this is TMI for some people, but anyone who has PCOS can definitely like raise their hand and be like, what was this? It can also include excessive hair growth or loss, irregular periods, mood swings, the inability to like sleep at night, and then be like insomnia. Essentially, there are like lots of different factors that can contribute. There's unintentional weight gain, because like I mentioned, it's quite closely tied to your glucose levels. And so for me, like growing up, I remember going to the doctor on multiple occasions because I did not have a period. I had horrible acne, and for years this went on, and they kept saying like, oh, it's puberty. And then come like 18, 19, 20, 21, still going to doctor. I remember I went to a doctor at 21. I had acne on my legs. Like, what a weird place to have it. And the doctor didn't say this, but this is more or less what she told me. She's like, I straight up don't know what's going on with you. I'm sending you to a dermatologist. And from the dermatologist, he was the first one that said, you might have like PCOS, and sent me to an endocrinologist. And so anyway, all of those different things that I was struggling with. So like weight gain, why I was constantly trying to lose weight, and therefore developed disordered eating / binge eating disorder. Also because, like I mentioned, it's closely tied to your glucose levels. And so it actually does make you crave carbs more, because how it works, if you're not someone who understands like diabetes, it's sort of similar. It means that the carbs, the sugar that you're ingesting isn't going into your cells. And so your body thinks, hey, we need more sugar, because they're not going into your cells and you're not using it. And so you're constantly eating carbs, and your body like isn't getting it. And so that's why it can also contribute to weight gain, all the acne. And so just like those are tons, all those different things, as I just mentioned, are going to make you feel pretty crappy about yourself, especially when you're going through high school, when you're going through college, all those different things, when you're interacting with your peers and you feel pretty crappy about yourself. And I'm putting that lightly. I like had intense body self-hate for a very long time because of all those things. And I never knew why. Knew why. And so sorry, this is just like me ranting about things, but these are all the different layers under the surface, you know, that then kind of I didn't know how to cope with that. And part of what led to, like I said, part of it was, I think, my own body with my PCOS and kind of carb cravings and all that other stuff. But then all of those different mental elements kind of letting loose in coping through food as well. And so it was kind of a double whammy. And then, like I said, having not the right mental capacity, like I wasn't seeing things in the right way. And so there were so many different elements involved. And I think each person has their own unique situation. I think part of what really helped me on my journey was I went to therapy for like 3 to 4 months. And I found that incredibly helpful while simultaneously working with the dietitian through all the different parameters. But to answer your question, there were so many different factors that led in, and everyone's going to have their own set of factors that they're going to need to work through, whatever those might be.
Yeah. And thank you so much for sharing that, because again, PCOS, I think, is again, one of those things that isn't explicitly shared. And I feel like just recently I've started to hear that more, you know, PCOS in different areas, but until a few years ago, like I never really heard that anywhere. And so I can imagine when you are experiencing those symptoms, it would be really, really difficult to go through that when you don't know what the cause of it is. And to have, it's tough, you know, like obviously medical people are trying to do a good job and direct you in the right direction. But when they tell you, I don't know what's wrong, it can almost be like, okay, what is actually wrong with me? You know,
and then you feel like it is myself, which is what led me to feeling like it's just something wrong with me. Like medically speaking, they can't find like what is causing this. And therefore, all of it's just on me, and you feel like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders. And I think it is mind-blowing that it took so long to get diagnosed. And that's actually something I'm personally passionate about, because if I had known I had PCOS, I would have figured out better how to manage it, how to like deal with all those different things, because I think in the medical field, it's referred to as more of a fertility issue, which also it is actually, hence the polycystic ovary syndrome. That's another symptom that because of the periods and the menstruation, like irregularity. But I think if I had known that sooner, I think my whole life could have changed sooner. So and they're just like different things. So anyway, I don't want to keep ranting about that unless you want me to. What I just like want to promote people to like figure their stuff out.
Yeah, no, I think it's great to say those symptoms out loud, because there might be somebody listening, be like, oh, I have that. And it may prompt them to be an advocate for themselves when they go to a medical provider and say, I think it might be this. Can we investigate that? And I think it's important for people to be aware of what it may be, especially if you're struggling with an eating disorder and then you have that on top of that. There's a lot of overlapping,
interconnected
symptoms. So
they refer to it as a constellation of symptoms, and I think that's why it can be very difficult to diagnose, in fairness to certain medical, because like I said, there are many that could be related to, like you said, other things. But sorry not to cut over you there.
Oh, no, you're fine. And on top of that, with the chronic back pain that you have, there's actually studies, and it's actually a study from this year that is showing that when pain becomes chronic, it actually increases a structure in your brain that is responsible for behavior modification, and actually changes your eating behaviors to desire more fat-like foods. So you end up wanting
it makes sense.
So
you're in pain. You want to do something to avoid the pain. And actually that's something that I meant to try and like come up a bit more, was when I got my back pain, it definitely 100% made my binge eating, disordered eating, whatever you want to call it, worse. Because when I was in pain, I remember thinking, I for the record, for people unaware of this, who I would assume probably everyone listening to this, I went to the ER in 3 different countries because of my back pain, mostly because of playing ultimate frisbee, but hurting my back in those places. And every time I was referred to a physical therapist, and even my stepmom, who's a physical therapist, said, like, by all means, like, you shouldn't have back pain. You're young, you're healthy, you're active, yada yada. Like, I'm still experiencing this, and so there's only so long you can endure physical pain or even emotional pain before you find a coping mechanism. Like I said, emotional or physical pain, you're going to look for a coping mechanism. And my coping mechanism for years, both physically and emotionally, was food. And so it was a compounded effect for many, many years. And the back pain certainly contributed.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. They are completely interrelated. And when you experience back pain, so pain can be, pain can be acute, where, you sprain your ankle, it hurts for a few weeks, and then it kind of goes away, and then you move on your life. And then there's chronic pain. And chronic pain is anything that lasts beyond like 6 weeks, really, and then it continues on for a long period of time, and it can ebb and flow. But again, you always kind of have some aspect of pain. And chronic pain is a whole different beast. And it's not dealt with appropriately in most instances. A lot of times things that it's dealt with just mask the pain rather than actually getting to the root cause of pain. And much of the root cause of pain is through the nervous system. So you can imagine if you have chronic stress for a long period of time and you're dealing with that, and then your nervous system gets hypervigilant, and then you're noticing pain, and then everything becomes tightened, and then that causes more pain. It's a vicious cycle on top of the eating disorder, which again increases your stress levels because there's a lot of shame and guilt in that. So it's this snowball effect, and they completely play on each other. So unless you address the root cause that's kind of contributing to both of them, then you could see why you went so long having both of those symptoms, because again, you can't treat it like an orthopedic pain because it's not necessarily orthopedic. So if you do, here's 3 sets of 10 of these exercises, good luck with that. You're really not going to get better. You have to address it through the root cause, which is the nervous system in that instance.
I think you put that so well, because there are so many different factors that interlink. And I think particularly in our medical system, the doctors are meant to treat symptoms, not the root cause. And so you can constantly go to doctors and they can give you medicine, prescriptions. And at the end, you're not even getting down to the roots of what is the issue. And so you're only prolonging it, and it is what it is. I'm sure everyone can understand what I'm trying to get at here, which is just completely understanding what you were saying, which it's terrible.
Yeah. And it just perpetuates. And then you can imagine when you go to all those practitioners like you did. I mean, you went to 3 ERs in 3 different countries. I mean, that's like traumatic in itself. I can imagine doing that. And then to have no long-term relief, that just compounds the issue. And then you start saying, really, what is wrong with me? Why am I not healing? Why do I not feel better? And especially as someone who's young, you're like, I shouldn't be experiencing this. I'm in my 20s. This is crazy.
Exactly.
I feel like really and then the fear in it, and fear is the number one predictor of whether you're going to have chronic pain or not. If you have fear, you're more likely to have chronic pain, and anything that contributes to that fear will contribute to the chronic pain. So that's why it's such a frustrating and complex thing, because if you don't address what's going on and decrease that fear response and decrease the I don't know what's going on responses from everybody else and all the masking that goes on, really you're just perpetuating the cycle, which is awful.
There's so many different ways to perpetuate the cycle. That's the problem. The problem is there's multiple problems. But
yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So kind of moving on from that, so talking about a lot of like your struggles that you went through, especially with like the chronic back pain, dealing with PCOS, and then the disordered eating. How would you say that now that you're in a better place with all those, how have those become strengths for you, all those struggles?
I think the first one I can think about off just the top of my head was now with PCOS, I know how to better manage it. For another thing, I should say, is for anyone that does get diagnosed with PCOS, like I just mentioned, doctors prescribe you stuff to treat the symptoms. And so if you are not getting a regular period, which like I said, is one of the symptoms of PCOS, doctors tend to put you on the pill to help regulate your cycles. And that's artificial hormones. And it wasn't until more recently that I actually signed up for a dietitian's PCOS course that she has a lot of different, I would go check her out if you have PCOS. Her Instagram is the women's dietitian on Instagram. Anyway, something that really helped me was learning how to manage my PCOS, which there are so many different ways to manage PCOS, which is why, like I said, I wish I had known about it sooner, because it's not just you get one medication, you're cured. Absolutely not. And so it's a matter of learning how to eat properly. It's a matter of exercising. It's a matter of stress management, which also ties to the back pain, as you aptly pointed out. It's a matter of learning how to do all of that and then regulate your cycles to become more have a regular period. And that's something that I had to learn to work out myself. And so there are a lot of different factors that contribute to something. Wow, I repeat your question because I lost my train of thought at some point.
Oh, no, you're fine. Yeah, I was asking you how the struggles that you've gone through with PCOS, back pain, and disordered eating, how have they become your strengths now?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
But yeah, so once I learned how to manage that, that helps help me now, but also the stress management. Also, when I went through therapy and work with a dietitian through intuitive eating, that helped me, like I mentioned, formerly go from black and white thinking to the gray area, which now those are the kind of things that I feel are now more of my strengths, because I know how to eat in a way that helps my body, to nourish my body, how I can move, because also in former days, there's a combination, I do enjoy working out, but I could definitely get obsessive about it in former years when I was trying to lose weight, because I didn't know how to do it effectively. There's a lot of learning that has gone into learning more about nutrition just in generally, but also for me specifically, stress management. Those different things are things that have definitely, I think, become more of my strengths that I don't think I don't think I had it all before.
Yeah.
And so, for instance, even just when I learned about macros, I think people think they know what nutrition is. And then I ask what macronutrients, or what are the 7 nutrients? I don't know if everyone can list those. What are the 3 macronutrients? Some people might know, what's in cheese, and little things that people may or may not know, I suppose. But what I'm trying to say is I didn't know that, because I remember when I was diagnosed with PCOS, I was told you have to go low carb. And to me, carbs meant rice, pasta, all the things that we associate, like pastries, but carbs are also fruit and vegetables, and you don't just eliminate fruit and vegetables from your diet. And so learning things like that can, again, go into what I was speaking with, operating the gray area and having more knowledge are definitely more of my strengths now, I would say.
Yeah. And I think especially the knowledge part of that, because you're always growing, and the more you know, the more you grow, essentially. So I think it's amazing when you find out all this information, really, it's so cliche, but knowledge really is power. And when just your knowledge that it is PCOS causing your symptoms, and then have the knowledge of the macros, and then that empowers you. So it's constantly being on a pursuit of gaining more knowledge about what's going on with yourself, and that introspection from figuring out what's going on within you, and then knowing how you can help yourself. I think that is just so important, to always be on that path of growth and figuring out how you can better serve yourself first. And from what I hear, that's exactly what you're doing. Yeah.
I realized that I answered that question very haphazardly, just all over the place. But I think it's because when you grow and evolve, just us as humans, it's so on an incremental basis that you don't always look back all the time and say, I think it's a question that I don't generally think to ask myself. How have I grown in the last, I mean, I've done it maybe in the last month where I thought, oh, I've accomplished X, Y, and Z, while I'm coming to the end of the year and trying to set new goals for 2023, but maybe not and to the level that you described, it's like, how is it now my strength, what I used to go through? I actually really like that question. I think it's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And I think sometimes too, like, I don't know if you noticed this when you were kind of in the thick of like the disordered eating, but I think sometimes we numb ourselves to feelings and
Yes.
recognizing what's going on within ourselves. Like I noticed that, like it took me a while to even like figure out what I was thinking or what I was feeling, like just be in tune with myself, because I feel like I numbed it so much that it really wasn't easy to figure out how to even help myself in many times. So I think that's one thing too. It's like you can really see as you recover and get yourself into a better place, you recognize like where you are on your stress levels, you recognize what you need, you start serving yourself better because you're more in tune with yourself when you're not always focused on like what you're taking in and what you're doing and the shame that you feel about that. It's like you open yourself up to the possibility of growth, which I think is just such a beautiful thing when you're kind of on the other side of it.
Something that you said just remind me, I have a podcast episode specifically designated to like emotional eating and kind of helping through that. But I would just like to specify, because you mentioned it, something that was hugely helpful for me, which I think I started learning when I worked with a dietitian with intuitive eating. She would have me write down my emotion before and after I was eating. And that was so helpful for me in kind of disattaching from the numbness that, like you mentioned, like you kind of we're on autopilot so much of the time that we aren't taking that time to kind of like even think about what we're feeling. It's just, it goes over our heads somehow. And so something that was hugely helpful for me was even just like taking like a split second to be like, even now sometimes I'm like, what am I feeling? And I'll think to myself and just literally taking that moment to say, I'm feeling like anxious, I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling upset, I'm feeling hurt, whatever it might be. And then in the past, I would just, before I even like had that intermediary thought, I would just go straight to food because that's what my body processed. It was the natural coping mechanism without any sort of evaluation. Now I can take that moment and be like, what am I feeling? And then no, food isn't the answer. And there's nothing wrong with like, if you have a bad day coming home and having like a bowl of mac and cheese or comfort food, but realizing for me, when I was like binging, realizing a binge isn't going to make me feel any better. And so targeting, like you said, the root cause, like I am feeling sad. What can I do to make me like feel a little bit better, even if it's not going to completely go away? Because I know binging on food is not going to make me feel better. It just won't. So
yeah. Oh, absolutely. And really, like when you're having those like those automatic thoughts, that's your subconscious brain. And we live most of our lives, like 90% of our lives, subconsciously. So when we formed all of these thoughts and behaviors and habits that we just do automatically, then that's just what we know. So unless we take a moment to stop and think about what am I doing and check it and question it and bring awareness to it, we're going to continue down the automatic path. So it's so important to take those moments and be like, okay, how do I actually feel? Why am I doing this right now? What will that bring me? And having those checkpoints and just starting to change and bring awareness to those subconscious thoughts, and now making them into subconscious thoughts that can serve you, because you can always change that. And that's really where that like wiring of the brain occurs. You know, our brains are always wiring from the minute we're born on. We're taking everything from our environment, our thoughts, our behaviors, what people say to us. We take them and we develop pathways, and whatever, excuse me, whatever is the strongest pathway is kind of what we go to because it's the most efficient. So unless we change that and make pathways that serve us better through different tools, then we're going to just continue down that path that's the most efficient and easiest, which unfortunately is not always the best for us.
Yes, I absolutely love that. The awareness first, and then being able to make, because then it's down to you. You get to choose after you become aware, because before you're even aware of it, you're not really choosing it. I think that's part of what the shame and guilt with like disordered eating can be involved, because you're not always actively choosing it. It's just like you said, the natural brain, like it's a habit at that point, and your brain just does what the habit is. You're hardly aware of it sometimes. So having that awareness, being able to choose, and then choosing what is best for you.
Yeah. And actually with binging and like bulimia are a little bit different than like anorexia and how the brain works. But with binging, it's a reward cycle. So when you binge, you actually get this like shot of dopamine in your brain, which is like rewarding. So your brain is wired different than somebody who has maybe a healthier relationship with food. So for anyone who does binge and has bulimia, like it literally is how your brain is responding, has been trained to respond. So when you're coming into a place that's a healthier relationship with food, you can understand why it's so difficult, because literally your brain thinks it's a reward. And then obviously things, you get the shame of it afterwards. But when you're having a binge, your dopamine is just like going crazy in your brain because it's rewarding when you're going through that. So it's very difficult to rewire that, but always possible. And again, once you bring awareness to that and recognize like, you're not crazy, it's not you, it's not these, negative things, like just recognize it in the most non-judgmental way, then now you can alter that in your brain and you can start working on changing those patterns of behavior.
Yes, completely. And one last thing I guess I'll say is I remember hearing that eating disorders and disordered eating is very tricky because like with the pleasure hit that you mentioned, like if someone is an alcoholic or a chronic smoker, you can technically just go cold turkey with those. Granted, I'm not trying to say it would be easy, but you can eliminate those from your life and you will live. You cannot eliminate food from your life and live. So you have to learn to operate in the gray area. It's just non-negotiable. So that's something I want to say so that people feel a little bit more validated when they struggle with this.
Oh, absolutely. It is. And by no means is it easy. It's a very, very complex thing. I know for both of us having gone through that, it's a very tough process, but it is absolutely possible to work through that and get into a healthier relationship. Like I know we talked about this earlier, when you look back on that person, it's like, you don't even recognize them because it's like, it doesn't feel like you anymore. You feel like a new person. I think back when I was in like the thick of it, and I've now opened up about that, but for a while I never told anybody about my eating disorder. But now that I talk about it, it's literally like I'm talking about a stranger, because it doesn't really, like, I don't think that way anymore. And so it really is amazing how far you can come, even no matter how far you're into it. So that's really that's right. Kind of going off of that, what would you say to your younger self? Like, what would you tell that girl? Like,
I think is you had mentioned this question to me before we hit record, and the first thing that came into my brain, quite honestly, which might not be the most sexiest popular like thought, is, I mean, I feel like I had to go through it. And I think someone said more recently that whatever like life has given you or what you have gone through was there for a reason, and because you are the person you are today. And I truly believe that, because I think I would be an entirely different person if I didn't have to experience it. And obviously there are times, like when I mentioned, I definitely think my life would have changed if I'd been diagnosed with PCOS sooner, but I don't necessarily always think so much in terms of, oh, my life could have been, because in my eyes, there's not really a point to like I don't know what it would be like, but this is what I am. And I'm, like you said, I'm growing, and I don't entirely know I don't think that I could have said anything to my former self that would have been like had that light bulb moment for me. Because I feel kind of bad saying this, because I remember when the first dietitian told me, I think you have like binge eating issues. I think it was when she told me that, from a professional who like I worked with. I trusted her at that point, because I had actually been losing weight with her, and she could have so easily continued coaching me, because I asked her, I was like, I want to continue coaching with you, I'm losing weight finally. And she's like, I'm noticing that you're binging, it's like not healthy, and I want to refer you to this other dietitian. She was losing money off of me, and but like for the purpose of helping me. And I'm so grateful to her for that, always. And I remember thinking, once that was the moment that I truly believed, and recognized I have a problem. I now know what the problem is, which I didn't have before. Like, I think I knew I kind of had a problem, but since I didn't know what it was, I didn't know how to get help, and I always thought I was alone. And so at that point is when I realized I have a problem. I know what it is. I now know how to get help, because she's referring me to this person who's apparently going to help me with my problems. And she did. And And I remember at the time what I was about to say was when I finally accepted that and realized it, I remember like telling asking my mom and dad, and I was like, how did you I had so many of the signs when I was young. Because I remember like when I was at my dad's house, I would like sneak in the middle of the night and like eat all the chocolate in his like one drawer that like had the chocolate. And I just looked back and I was like, that's so clearly like disordered eating. Like if you're sneaking food, feeling like you like are too ashamed to like eat in front of other people. Or I remember I used to eat like a bunch, like tons of protein bars at my mom's house, and she's like, they're not candy. And I was like, they sure taste like it. Things that you just quote unquote normal people wouldn't do. And I remember asking them like, why did you like not like refer me to a specialist back then when like it was clear I had problems? And I remember my mom saying like, you just like were not in a place where you like, if I had even said it, you wouldn't have accepted it, you wouldn't have not. And I as soon as she said that, I was like, she's completely right. I was not, especially when you're in the thick of it. Something has to at some point happen in your life that you like fully accept, you realize, you acknowledge, like, I don't know what it is for any given person. And I don't think that if I were to talk to my former self, I would have been able to give that light bulb moment. Everyone's just on their own path and things happen when they happen. That's a very long explanation I don't really think that there's any real advice I could have given my former self because I just wouldn't have accepted it back then.
Yeah, I completely agree because I actually feel the same way. I would not have changed what I went through, as terrible as it was. And as many of years of my life it kind of took away from me, I would not change it because it brought me to where I am today. And it's interesting you say that because another person I had on my podcast said the exact same thing.
Oh, so, yeah, I think everyone resonates with that because your journey is your journey. And at some point you realize you had to go through it in order to learn what you know now. And and like I said, it's a transformational journey because like I mentioned with the metaphor with the skin or the simile, I think it's technically called, whatever, I don't care. People understand what I'm saying. When I said like shedding the snake skin, it's also the caterpillar transforming into the butterfly. And I think it's beautiful because now I feel so much more empowered from going through that. And I think a lot of people in life, not just with disordered eating, will say that some of their hardest moments are now, like you said, like their strengths. So, and I think it also really helped me with that awareness when I had to go through that. Not only did it help my disordered eating, but it really took to help me take a step back and look at my career and my life and think, do I want to keep staying in corporate finance for years and then have a midlife crisis? I was currently having a quarter life crisis because this was at 25 and I was like, I don't think I want this for my life. And then realized this is not my purpose. This is not my passion. I'm good at it. I enjoy it some of the time, but it's not my passion, purpose, passion, you know, all those different things. And so that's what helped me go back to my original passion, which was food. Prior to me even developing my disordered eating, binge eating disorder, when I was in middle school, I loved making cakes and selling cakes and all those different things. And so now it just seemed like food and nutrition gave me more of a purpose to help others. So that's a very long explanation for your question, but you know.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, I think it really is like you have a passion and purpose and you're meant to kind of go down that way. And you can almost feel when it resonates with you, if it feels right, it's just a way it feels. And when you're going through something like corporate finance and it's not resonating with you and you feel like you're just clashing where you belong, it's like, that's when you know you have to pivot and go down a different path. So it really is amazing, your story, because that will resonate with someone and that will help you help someone in the future who maybe is going through something difficult. And now you have gone through that, will give you that experience to really truly help people in such a profound way. So I truly believe you go through everything for a reason. We don't know what they are when we're in them. And sometimes we really resent what we're going through, but when you're outside of it and you can see things a little bit more objectively, you can kind of understand why you went through that, which is really such a beautiful thing.
100%.
So kind of wrapping things up, for anyone who wants to connect with you, where can they find you? And if you could just share wherever they can connect with you.
Yes. Okay. So I do have a podcast, which I have kind of put on the back burner. It's called Kaleidoscope FM. I realize that is a long name and not everyone can spell kaleidoscope. But the easier option to find me, which is more prevalent these days, is since I'm going to be starting my master's this January in applied nutrition to become a registered dietitian, I have the Instagram handle Expanding Nutrition. All like there's no dashes or anything. It's literally just all one word essentially. Expanding Nutrition. Also, I have my own website, www.expandingnutrition.com. And if you go to the resources page of that website, I specifically created a resource for people overcoming disordered eating that includes all like as many of the like podcast books, audio books, workbooks, miscellaneous things that I thought was really helpful on my journey. And that's just a free resource. Just go click on it. You'll have a PDF if that's something you want to check out. So I think the easiest place to find me would be Instagram at Expanding Nutrition. And anything, I also have a link tree on my bio. So anything else from there, if you want a free guide to 10 top ways to eat more veggies, that's also a resource that you could check out if that's something that you struggle with and need ideas. So I think that's everything from me.
Perfect. Yeah. And I'll include all your links in the bio too. So for this podcast, so in the show notes rather. So if you want to connect to Francesca, it'll all be there and make it easy for you. So thank you so much again for joining me and being so candid. It was such a great conversation, always is when I talk to you. So thank you again for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you so much. I love speaking with you all the time.
Oh. Thanks. And for anyone who is listening, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Please leave any questions or comments you have for myself or Francesca. We'll be happy to answer them and continue to listen. I appreciate everyone's support. So thank you again.